The desert wind carved through the abandoned buildings of Fallujah, carrying with it the scent of dust and danger. In the shadows of a crumbling two-story structure, a figure moved with practiced silence. The locals called her the Ghost, though they never saw her face. The insurgents whispered stories of an invisible death that came from nowhere, striking their leaders with impossible precision before vanishing without a trace. Sara Martinez had been in Iraq for 8 months, but officially she didn't exist. No military records bore her name in this capacity. No unit roster included her assignment. She was a phantom operating in the gray spaces between official missions and desperate necessity. The Army had trained her as a communications specialist, but the chaos of war had revealed talents that no training manual could teach. Her journey to this moment began 3 years earlier in a small Texas town where her grandfather had taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts with an old hunting rifle. What started as weekend fun had evolved into something extraordinary. By age 16, she could hit a quarter from 300 yards. By 18, she had won every shooting competition within a 500-mile radius. When Sara enlisted, the recruiter saw a young woman who scored perfectly on aptitude tests and spoke fluent Arabic thanks to her Lebanese grandmother. They needed translators and radio operators, not snipers. The military in 2004 wasn't ready to officially recognize women in direct combat roles, regardless of their abilities. Everything changed during her 3rd month in Iraq. Sara's convoy had been providing communication support to a Marine unit when they were ambushed in a narrow street in Ramadi. The attack was coordinated and brutal. RPGs screamed from rooftops while automatic weapons fire poured from windows and doorways. Within minutes, half the Marines were down, including their sniper. Pinned behind a damaged Humvee, Sergeant Rodriguez grabbed Sara's shoulder. His eyes were wild with desperation as bullets cracked overhead. The Marines were trapped in a killing field with no way out. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves perfectly, using the urban terrain to their advantage. "Martinez, you said you could shoot, right?" Rodriguez shouted over the gunfire. "I mean, really shoot." Sara nodded, her heart pounding as she watched Marines falling one by one. Rodriguez pointed toward a Barrett M82 rifle lying beside the wounded sniper. The weapon seemed impossibly large, its scope glinting in the harsh Iraqi sun. "Those shooters on the rooftop are picking us apart. Can you do something about it?" Without hesitation, Sara crawled toward the fallen Marine. Bullets sparked off concrete around her as she reached the massive rifle. She had never fired a .50 caliber weapon, but the principles remained the same. Distance, wind, elevation, breathing. The fundamentals her grandfather had drilled into her since childhood. She found cover behind a concrete barrier and shouldered the Barrett. Through the scope, she could see 3 enemy fighters on a rooftop 400 meters away. They were taking turns firing down at the trapped Marines, confident in their elevated position and protective cover. Sara's first shot took the center fighter in the chest, the massive .50 caliber round dropping him instantly. The other 2 scrambled for better cover, but she was already tracking them. Her second shot punched through the concrete they were hiding behind, and her third eliminated the remaining threat. The Marines used the momentary respite to reposition and call in air support, but Sara wasn't finished. She had spotted muzzle flashes from 3 other buildings and began systematically eliminating threats. Each shot was deliberate and precise. Within 20 minutes, she had taken down 8 enemy fighters and broken the ambush. When the firefight ended, the surviving Marines stared at Sara with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Rodriguez approached her slowly, as if seeing her for the first time. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" Sara wiped sweat from her forehead, her hands still steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "My grandfather taught me on a ranch in Texas." Word of the incident spread quickly through informal channels. Marines talked to other Marines, and within days, Sara found herself receiving unofficial requests for assistance. A patrol needed overwatch for a dangerous route. A forward operating base wanted someone to watch their perimeter during supply runs. A special operations team required precision fire support for a high-value target mission. Each time, Sarah delivered results that defied explanation. Her accuracy was phenomenal, but more importantly, she seemed to understand the tactical situation instinctively. She could read the battlefield like a book, predicting enemy movements and positioning herself for maximum effect. Colonel Williams first heard about Sarah through whispered conversations in the officers' mess hall. As the commanding officer of the Marine unit Sarah had saved, he knew something extraordinary had happened that day in Ramadi. The official reports credited supporting elements with providing sniper fire, but Williams knew the truth was far more complicated. 3 weeks later, Williams found himself in an impossible situation. Intelligence had located a high-priority target in Fallujah, a bomb maker responsible for dozens of American casualties. The target was holed up in a heavily fortified compound, surrounded by experienced fighters who knew the Americans were coming. The mission required precision that none of his available snipers could guarantee. The shot was nearly impossible, over 800 meters through a narrow window, with civilians in the surrounding buildings and innocent people who could be harmed if the operation went wrong. Williams knew he was about to make a decision that could end his career. Late that night, he walked to the communications tent, where Sarah was monitoring radio traffic. She looked up as he approached, her dark eyes alert despite the late hour. "Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Can you make an impossible shot?" Sarah studied his face in the dim light of the tent. She had heard rumors about the bomb maker, knew that American lives hung in the balance. "How impossible are we talking about, sir?" Williams spread out satellite photos on the table between them. The target building was a maze of concrete and steel, surrounded by other structures packed with families. One wrong shot could kill innocent people. One missed shot would alert every enemy fighter in the area. 840 meters. Single window, 18 inches wide. Moving target. Crosswind at 15 knots. You get one chance, and if you miss, a lot of good people are going to die. Sarah examined the photos carefully, calculating angles and distances in her head. She had never attempted a shot at that range under those conditions, but she had never backed down from a challenge either. "I can make the shot, sir, but I'll need to get closer to the target building without being detected." Williams felt a mixture of relief and terror. He was about to send an officially non-existent female soldier on an unauthorized mission that violated every regulation he had sworn to uphold. But he also knew that Sarah represented their best chance of success. This conversation never happened. "If you get caught, I don't know you. If you succeed, nobody will ever know what you did. Are you willing to accept those terms?" Sarah smiled grimly. "I've been operating under those terms since I got here, sir. What's one more mission?" The next morning, Sarah disappeared into the urban landscape of Fallujah like smoke in the wind. She carried minimum equipment, a modified M24 rifle, ammunition, water, and emergency medical supplies. No identification, no backup plan, no official support. Moving through the city required every skill she had developed over the past months. She avoided main roads, using abandoned buildings and drainage tunnels to approach the target area. Twice she had to hide from insurgent patrols, pressing herself into shadows while armed men passed within arm's reach. By evening, she had positioned herself in a bombed-out apartment building 700 meters from the target. The distance was shorter than planned, but the angle was better. Through her scope, she could see into the room where intelligence reports placed the bomb maker. For 6 hours, Sarah waited. Her body ached from maintaining position, and her throat was dry despite careful water rationing. The target building seemed empty, and she began to wonder if the intelligence had been wrong. Then, at 0347 hours, a light flickered in the target window. Sarah adjusted her scope and controlled her breathing as a figure moved into view. The man matched the photos she had studied, and she could see bomb-making materials scattered on the table beside him. The crosswind had shifted since her arrival, and she made minute adjustments to compensate. Through her scope, she could see the target clearly, but she also noticed something that made her blood run cold. A child's bicycle was visible in the corner of the room. Sarah hesitated, her finger on the trigger. The mission required her to take the shot, but the possibility of collateral damage changed everything. She watched through her scope as the target moved around the room, and her heart sank as she realized the truth. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, was sleeping on a mat in the corner. The bicycle belonged to her, and she was directly in the line of fire behind the target. For 20 minutes, Sarah waited for the child to move or the target to position himself differently. Neither happened. The bomb maker continued his work while the girl slept peacefully, unaware of the danger surrounding her. Sarah faced an impossible choice. The mission demanded she take the shot, but her conscience would not allow her to risk an innocent child's life. She made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. Instead of shooting the bomb maker, Sarah shifted her aim to the materials on his table. The shot was even more difficult, requiring her to hit a target the size of a coffee cup from 700 meters away. If she missed, she would alert every enemy fighter in the compound and lose any chance of completing the mission. The shot was perfect. The bullet struck the bomb-making materials, triggering a small explosion that killed the target instantly, while leaving the sleeping child unharmed. The blast was contained within the room, and Sarah watched through her scope as the girl woke up confused but safe. The mission was complete, but Sarah knew she had crossed a line. She had made an unauthorized modification to her orders based on personal judgment, a decision that could be interpreted as insubordination or worse. During her extraction through the city, Sarah encountered a problem she hadn't anticipated. An insurgent patrol had discovered her position and was tracking her through the abandoned buildings. Armed with automatic weapons and familiar with the local terrain, they had the advantage. Sarah found herself trapped in a partially collapsed structure with enemy fighters closing in from 3 directions. She had limited ammunition and no backup support. For the first time since arriving in Iraq, she wondered if she had finally met her match. The urban combat that followed lasted 4 hours and tested every skill Sarah had learned. She used her rifle for precision shots when possible, switching to her sidearm when enemies got too close. She moved through the building like a ghost, using debris and shadows to stay ahead of her pursuers. When dawn broke over Fallujah, Sarah emerged from the ruins bloodied and exhausted but alive. Behind her, 7 enemy fighters lay dead in the building they had thought would be her tomb. She had escaped using a combination of marksmanship, tactics, and sheer determination that bordered on the supernatural. Colonel Williams was waiting for her at the extraction point, his face a mask of controlled tension. He had monitored radio traffic throughout the night, knowing that Sarah was fighting for her life but unable to provide assistance without revealing the unauthorized mission. "Is it done?" he asked simply. Sarah nodded, too exhausted for a detailed report. "Target eliminated. No civilian casualties." Williams studied her face, seeing something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The mission had changed her in ways that would take time to understand. She had proven herself under impossible conditions, but the cost was becoming apparent. There are going to be more missions like this one. The war is changing, and we need people who can adapt with it. But I need to know that you understand what you're getting into. Sarah looked back toward Fallujah, where smoke was still rising from the building where she had fought her way to freedom. She thought about the sleeping child, the impossible shot, and the choices that had led her to this moment. "Understand, sir. When do we start?" 6 months after the Fallujah incident, Sarah had become a legend that officially didn't exist. Military personnel throughout Iraq whispered stories of impossible shots and miraculous rescues, but no records documented her achievements. She operated in the shadows, called upon when conventional tactics failed, and desperate situations demanded extraordinary solutions. The transformation had been gradual, but profound. Sarah no longer resembled the young communications specialist who had arrived in Iraq a year earlier. Her movements were economical and precise, her awareness of surroundings absolute. She had learned to read people and situations with the same accuracy she applied to long-range shots, understanding that survival depended on more than marksmanship. Her unofficial status provided both advantages and challenges. She could operate without the bureaucratic constraints that limited regular military units, but she also lacked the support systems that protected conventional soldiers. Medical care, equipment replacement, and backup support were all arranged through informal networks and personal relationships. Colonel Williams had become her unofficial handler, coordinating requests from various units while maintaining plausible deniability about her activities. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and understanding, built on shared recognition of the moral complexities they navigated daily. The morning that would change everything began like many others. Sarah was cleaning her rifle in a small room she had converted into a makeshift quarters when Williams appeared in the doorway. His expression was more serious than usual, and she immediately sensed the gravity of whatever mission he was about to describe. "We've got a situation in Mosul that's beyond critical. A SEAL team went in to extract a high-value intelligence asset, and they're pinned down in hostile territory. Air support can't get close enough because of civilian populations, and ground reinforcements are 12 hours away." Sarah set down her cleaning rod and gave Williams her full attention. SEAL teams represented the military's elite forces, trained to handle situations that would overwhelm regular units. If they were calling for help, the situation was desperate beyond measure. Williams spread out reconnaissance photos on the small table between them. The images showed an urban area that had been heavily damaged by fighting, with narrow streets and multi-story buildings providing perfect cover for enemy forces. "The team is trapped in a compound here." Williams pointed to a building marked with red ink. "They're surrounded by approximately 40 enemy fighters with automatic weapons, RPGs, and local knowledge of the terrain. The SEAL commander specifically requested our ghost shooter." Sarah studied the photos carefully, noting escape routes, defensive positions, and potential problems. The compound was located in the heart of enemy-controlled territory, accessible only through streets that provided multiple ambush opportunities. Any rescue attempt would face overwhelming odds. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "The team has been pinned down for 6 hours. They have limited ammunition and medical supplies. Intelligence estimates they have maybe 8 hours before their position becomes completely untenable." Sarah calculated distances and travel time in her head. Mosul was 3 hours away by helicopter, assuming they could find a landing zone that wasn't under enemy observation. Once on the ground, she would need time to reach an effective firing position and assess the tactical situation. "I can be in position within 5 hours, but I'll need detailed intelligence on enemy positions and friendly locations. One wrong shot in this situation could kill the people we're trying to save." Williams nodded grimly. "That's why you're the only option we have. But, Sarah, you need to understand something. This mission is different from anything you've done before. If you're compromised, we can't extract you. If you're captured, you don't exist. Are you prepared for those consequences?" Sarah had faced similar risks on previous missions, but something in Williams' tone suggested additional complications she hadn't yet understood. She waited for him to continue, knowing that complete information was essential for mission success. "The SEAL team includes Commander Jake Morrison. He's been hunting for our ghost shooter for months, trying to figure out who's been making these impossible shots. If you save his team, he's going to want answers we can't give him." The complexity of the situation became clear to Sarah in that moment. She would be risking everything to save a man who had been investigating her existence, potentially exposing the entire shadow operation that had kept her active in the field. "Does that change the mission?" she asked. Williams shook his head slowly. "Those are American soldiers trapped in there. Whatever happens afterward, we don't abandon our people." 2 hours later, Sarah was aboard a Black Hawk helicopter racing toward Mosul. The flight crew had been told they were transporting a specialist to provide reconnaissance support, a cover story that explained her presence without revealing her true purpose. During the flight, She reviewed everything known about the Trap SEAL team. Commander Morrison had a reputation for tactical brilliance and absolute dedication to his men. His team had been operating in Iraq for 7 months, conducting high-risk missions that had eliminated numerous high-value targets. The helicopter landed in a dust cloud 3 kilometers from the target area, far enough from the fighting to avoid detection, but close enough for Sarah to reach the battle zone on foot. She carried her customized M24 rifle, extra ammunition, emergency medical supplies, and communications equipment that would allow her to coordinate with the Trap SEAL team. Moving through Mosul required navigating an urban landscape transformed by months of warfare. Buildings showed evidence of fierce fighting, with walls pockmarked by bullet holes and entire structures reduced to rubble. The civilian population had largely fled, leaving behind an eerie ghost town perfect for urban warfare. Sarah approached the target area using techniques developed through months of similar operations. She moved in short bursts from cover to cover, constantly scanning for enemy positions and potential threats. The sound of gunfire grew louder as she got closer, indicating that the battle was still ongoing. Finding an effective firing position proved more challenging than anticipated. The enemy had positioned themselves expertly, using the urban terrain to maximize their advantages while minimizing exposure to counterattack. Sarah spent 30 minutes surveying the area before locating a partially collapsed building that offered the angle she needed. The structure had been an apartment complex before the war, its upper floors damaged by artillery, but still structurally sound enough to support her weight. Sarah climbed to the 5th floor, moving carefully to avoid creating noise that might alert enemy forces to her presence. From her position, she could see the compound where the SEAL team was trapped. The building was surrounded by enemy fighters positioned in windows, on rooftops, and behind barriers constructed from rubble and abandoned vehicles. The tactical situation was as desperate as Williams had described. Through her rifle scope, Sarah began identifying targets and calculating shooting solutions. The ranges varied from 300 to 700 meters, with multiple obstacles and wind conditions affecting each potential shot. She would need to eliminate threats systematically while avoiding detection. Her earpiece crackled to life as she established communication with the Trap SEAL team. The voice that answered was calm and professional despite the desperate circumstances. "This is Actual. Who am I talking to?" Sarah recognized Commander Morrison's voice from mission briefings she had attended. "This is Overwatch. I'm in position to provide fire support." There was a pause as Morrison processed this information. "Overwatch, we've been expecting air support or ground reinforcement. What's your unit designation?" Sarah had prepared for this question, knowing that her unofficial status would create complications. "That's classified, Actual. Right now, I'm your best option for getting out of this situation alive." Morrison's tone sharpened with suspicion and frustration. "I don't know who you are or who sent you, but my team is running low on everything, and we need real support, not some cowboy operation." The skepticism in Morrison's voice stung, but Sarah understood his position. As a SEAL commander, he was responsible for the lives of his men and couldn't afford to trust an unknown element without verification. "Actual, look toward the building with the red door, 2nd floor window. Enemy sniper has been targeting your east wall." Sarah had identified the threat moments earlier, noting the muzzle flashes and the tactical problem it created for the Trap team. Through her scope, she could see the enemy sniper moving into position for another shot. "I see the position, but how do you—" Sarah's shot interrupted Morrison's question. The .308 bullet covered 420 meters in less than half a second, striking the enemy sniper center mass and eliminating the immediate threat to the SEAL team's position. The radio remained silent for several seconds before Morrison's voice returned, noticeably different in tone. "Good shot, Overwatch. We've been trying to get that guy for 2 hours." Over the next 30 minutes, Sarah systematically eliminated 12 enemy fighters while providing tactical intelligence to help the SEAL team reorganize their defensive positions. Each shot was planned and executed with precision that bordered on the supernatural, creating opportunities for the trap team to improve their situation. The enemy forces began to realize they were facing a new threat, but Sarah's position remained undetected. She moved frequently within the damaged building, using different windows and angles to maintain the element of surprise, while continuing to reduce the odds facing Morrison's team. Overwatch, we're ready to attempt a breakout toward the extraction point. Can you provide covering fire for our movement? Sarah surveyed the route the team would need to take, identifying multiple threats that could turn the extraction into a disaster. The enemy had positioned automatic weapons to cover the most likely escape routes, creating overlapping fields of fire that would be deadly for anyone attempting to cross. Actual, hold your position for 60 seconds while I clear the route. What followed became the stuff of legend among those who witnessed it. In less than a minute, Sarah fired 8 shots that eliminated 3 machine gun positions and 2 RPG teams, creating a corridor of relative safety for the SEAL team's movement. Morrison's team moved with a professional efficiency that made them elite warriors, but even they were amazed by the precision of the covering fire. Enemy fighters who attempted to engage the moving SEALs found themselves targeted by shots that seemed to come from impossible angles. The extraction proceeded flawlessly until the team reached a street intersection 300 meters from their destination. An enemy force that had been held in reserve suddenly appeared, blocking the route with superior numbers and positioning. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with controlled urgency. Overwatch, we've got a problem. 30-plus hostiles blocking our path to the extraction point. We're pinned down again. Sarah assessed the new tactical situation through her scope, counting enemy positions and calculating the impossibility of what Morrison was requesting. 30 enemy fighters spread across multiple positions would require more ammunition than she carried, and the ranges involved approached the limits of her rifle's effectiveness. I can't eliminate that many targets from this position. You need to find an alternate route or wait for additional support. The silence that followed suggested Morrison was weighing options that didn't exist. The SEAL team was trapped between enemy forces with limited ammunition and no backup plan. Sarah realized that conventional tactics wouldn't save them. Overwatch, what if we create a distraction? Draw their attention while you reposition for better shots. The plan Morrison suggested was essentially a suicide mission for whoever provided the distraction, but Sarah understood the desperate logic behind it. The SEAL team was out of options, and someone needed to accept significant risk to create any possibility of survival. Negative, actual. I have a different idea, but it's going to require precise timing and absolute trust in my abilities. Sarah's plan was risky beyond calculation, but it represented the only chance of getting Morrison's team out alive. She would move to a new position that offered better angles on the enemy force, then provide covering fire while the SEALs advanced directly toward the hostile positions. Overwatch, that's insane. You'd be exposing yourself to counterattack from multiple directions. Sarah was already moving toward her new position, knowing that speed was essential for success. Sometimes insane is the only option that works. Be ready to move on my signal. The new firing position was on the ground floor of a building that placed Sarah dangerously close to enemy forces, but it also provided the angles necessary to engage multiple targets rapidly. She would have perhaps 2 minutes before the enemy located her position and responded with overwhelming firepower. From her new location, Sarah could see Morrison's team crouched behind cover, waiting for her signal. The SEAL commander's face was visible through her scope, and she could see the mixture of determination and concern in his expression. Move now. What followed became known among Special Operations personnel as the Mosul Miracle. Sarah fired 23 shots in 90 seconds, each one precisely calculated to eliminate threats as Morrison's team advanced toward the extraction point. Enemy fighters fell before they could effectively respond, creating a corridor of destruction that allowed the SEALs to reach safety. By the time enemy forces located Sarah's position and began returning fire, Morrison's team had reached the extraction point and called in air support. Apache helicopters arrived to provide covering fire as Sarah made her own escape through the maze of damaged buildings. The helicopter ride back to base was conducted in complete silence, with Morrison lost in thought about what he had witnessed. Sarah had saved his entire team through marksmanship that defied explanation, but her identity remained a mystery that troubled him deeply. Upon landing, Morrison immediately began making inquiries about the mysterious sniper who had saved his team. Official channels provided no information, and unofficial sources claimed no knowledge of any such operator. The ghost shooter had once again vanished without leaving any trace of their existence. 3 days later, Morrison received orders to report to Colonel Williams' office for debriefing about the Mosul incident. He arrived expecting a routine after-action review, but instead found himself facing questions about classified operations and compartmented information. Williams' questions were careful and indirect, probing Morrison's knowledge about the sniper support he had received while avoiding any direct admission that such support had been provided. The conversation danced around the truth without ever acknowledging the reality of what had happened. "Commander, your report mentions receiving fire support from an unknown element. Can you provide any additional details about this assistance?" Morrison studied Williams' face, recognizing the careful phrasing of someone walking through a minefield of classified information. "Sir, someone saved my team with shooting that was beyond anything I've ever seen. I'd like to know who they were so I can properly thank them." Williams nodded slowly, understanding the gratitude and frustration in Morrison's voice. Sometimes in war, help comes from unexpected sources. The important thing is that your team came home alive. The non-answer confirmed Morrison's suspicions that he had encountered something outside normal military operations. His experience as a SEAL commander had taught him to recognize when information was being compartmented for security reasons. But this felt different. "Sir, with respect, whoever that shooter was, they deserve recognition for what they did. My entire team owes their lives to someone who took extraordinary risks to save people they'd never met." Williams felt the weight of Morrison's words, knowing that Sarah deserved the recognition she would never receive. The moral complexity of her situation had grown beyond anything they had originally anticipated, creating dilemmas that had no easy solutions. "Commander, some heroes operate in the shadows not because they choose to, but because the nature of their service requires it. The best way to honor what was done for your team is to respect the necessity of that anonymity." Morrison left the meeting with more questions and answers, but also with a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made by people whose names would never appear in official records. The ghost shooter had saved his team and then disappeared back into the shadows, asking for nothing in return. That evening, Morrison found himself standing outside the communications tent where Sarah worked her official duties. He had learned her name through careful investigation, but he still didn't know her true role in the events that had saved his team. Sarah looked up as Morrison approached, her expression neutral despite recognizing him immediately. The moment she had been dreading since the Mosul mission had finally arrived, and she prepared herself for questions she couldn't answer. "Specialist Martinez, I am Commander Morrison. I wanted to thank you for the excellent communication support during our recent operation." The careful phrasing told Sarah that Morrison suspected more than he could prove, but he was offering her a way to maintain her cover while acknowledging what had happened. She recognized the gesture as both professional courtesy and personal gratitude. "Just doing my job, sir. I'm glad your team made it back safely." Morrison studied her face, seeing something in her eyes that confirmed his suspicions while respecting her need to maintain operational security. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it established an understanding between two warriors who recognized each other's dedication and sacrifice. As Morrison walked away, Sarah realized that her anonymous existence was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Too many people had witnessed her abilities, and the questions were multiplying faster than the answers. She sensed that changes were coming that would force difficult decisions about her future role in the war. The morning that would forever change Sarah's life began with an urgent summons to Colonel Williams' office. She arrived to find not only Williams, but also Commander Morrison and two men in civilian clothes who carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of senior intelligence officials. Williams' expression was grave as he gestured for Sarah to take a seat. The presence of unknown personnel and what had always been private conversations between her and Williams immediately set her on edge. She recognized the signs of a situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. Martinez, these gentlemen are from Defense Intelligence. They have some questions about your activities over the past year. The older of the two civilians, a gray-haired man with calculating eyes, opened a thick folder and spread photographs across Williams' desk. Sarah recognized images from several of her missions, including surveillance photos that showed her in positions she thought had been unobserved. Specialist Martinez, I'm Agent Harrison. We've been tracking some unusual patterns in insurgent casualties over the past 14 months. Specifically, we've identified 47 enemy deaths that share certain characteristics, suggesting they were eliminated by the same shooter. Sarah maintained her composure while her mind raced through the implications. If Defense Intelligence had been investigating her activities, then her existence was no longer the closely held secret she and Williams had maintained. Harrison continued, his tone professionally neutral, but carrying an undercurrent of suspicion. These eliminations occurred across multiple operational areas, often in support of missions that had no officially assigned sniper assets. We're very interested in understanding how this was accomplished. Commander Morrison spoke for the first time since Sarah had entered the room. Sir, if I may, based on my direct experience, this individual provided fire support that saved American lives under impossible circumstances. Whatever irregularities exist in the documentation, the results speak for themselves. The second civilian, a younger man with the intense focus of someone accustomed to uncovering secrets, fixed Sarah with a stare that seemed designed to provoke a reaction. Specialist Martinez, our investigation has revealed that you have no formal sniper training, no authorization to conduct the operations attributed to you, and no legal authority to eliminate enemy combatants in a direct action capacity. Williams started to object, but Harrison raised a hand to silence him. Colonel, we understand the unusual circumstances you've been operating under, but the fact remains that this situation has created legal and operational complications that must be addressed. Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Sir, every action I've taken has been in direct support of authorized military operations and in defense of American personnel under immediate threat. Harrison nodded slowly, consulting his notes before continuing. We don't question your motivations or your results, Specialist. What concerns us is the precedent this situation establishes and the potential complications it creates for future operations. The conversation was interrupted by William's aide, who entered with an urgent message that required the colonel's immediate attention. As Williams stepped outside to handle the emergency, Harrison's demeanor shifted subtly towards something more conspiratorial. Specialist Martinez, off the record, what you've accomplished is remarkable. Your success rate exceeds that of our most elite snipers, and your tactical judgment has been flawless. That's why we're here with a proposition rather than an arrest warrant. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and suspicion at the unexpected turn in the conversation. The possibility that this meeting might lead to opportunity rather than court-martial hadn't occurred to her, but she remained cautious about whatever proposal might be forthcoming. Morrison leaned forward, his expression indicating this was the first he was hearing of any proposition. Gentlemen, what exactly are you suggesting? The younger agent, who had been introduced as Agent Carter, opened a second folder containing documents that Sarah couldn't read from her position. The military is evolving, and so are the threats we face. We need operatives who can function effectively in the gray areas where conventional forces are constrained by regulations that don't account for modern realities. Harrison took over the explanation, his tone becoming more businesslike. We're offering you an opportunity to continue your work under official auspices, with proper training, equipment, and legal protection. But it would mean leaving your current assignment and accepting a role that exists outside normal military structures. The offer was both everything Sarah had hoped for and nothing like what she had expected. Official recognition and support for her abilities would solve many of the problems that had complicated her operations, but it would also mean abandoning the informal networks that had become like family to her. What exactly would this role involve, she asked. Carter smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. Operations that require plausible deniability, situations where regular military units can't be deployed, missions that exist in the spaces between official policy and practical necessity. Morrison's expression darkened as he began to understand what was being proposed. You're talking about black operations, assassination missions with no oversight and no accountability. Harrison's response was carefully measured. We're talking about protecting American interests and American lives using all available resources. Specialist Martinez has already proven her effectiveness in this capacity. Sarah recognized that she was being recruited for something far more complex than her current informal status. The prospect of official support was appealing, but the implications of what Harrison and Carter were describing troubled her deeply. Williams returned to the office, immediately sensing the tension that had developed in his absence. Gentlemen, I hope we're not discussing anything that would compromise the operational security we've worked so hard to maintain. Carter closed his folder with a snap that seemed to punctuate the end of the recruitment pitch. Colonel, this conversation is compartmented at the highest levels. Nothing discussed here will affect current operations. The dismissive tone Carter used when addressing Williams triggered something protective in Sarah. Williams had been her advocate and protector throughout her unofficial operations, accepting personal risk to support her missions. The suggestion that he was now irrelevant to her future was both insulting and alarming. Sir, with respect, Colonel Williams has been essential to everything I've accomplished. Any future arrangements would need to include his continued involvement. Harrison exchanged a glance with Carter before responding. Specialists, the operations we're discussing would be conducted by personnel who report directly to our agency. Colonel Williams' current role would become unnecessary. The finality of Harrison's statement clarified the choice Sarah was being asked to make. She could accept official status and support, but only by abandoning the relationships and principles that had guided her throughout the war. Morrison spoke before Sarah could respond, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. Gentlemen, I've seen this soldier in action under the worst possible circumstances. Her judgment and integrity are beyond question, which is why I'm telling you that recruiting her for off-the-books operations would be a waste of her talents and a disservice to her character. The unexpected support from Morrison strengthened Sarah's resolve to reject the offer, but she also recognized that refusing defense intelligence could create new problems for everyone involved in her unauthorized operations. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in leaving my current assignment. The work I'm doing here is important, and I want to continue supporting the troops who need it most. Carter's expression suggested he had expected this response, and found it disappointing but not surprising. Specialist, you should understand that our offer represents the only way for you to continue operating in your current capacity with official protection. Without our backing, your activities will inevitably face scrutiny that could result in court-martial proceedings. The threat was delivered with professional courtesy, but Sarah recognized it as coercion designed to force her acceptance of terms she found unacceptable. The realization that she was being blackmailed by her own government was both shocking and infuriating. Williams stepped forward, his command presence asserting itself in the face of the implied threat. Agent Carter, are you suggesting that this specialist faces legal jeopardy for actions taken in defense of American personnel? Harrison intervened before Carter could respond, recognizing that the conversation was approaching dangerous territory. Colonel, we're simply pointing out that irregular operations require irregular solutions. This situation has existed in a legal gray area that can't continue indefinitely. Sarah made her decision with the clarity that had characterized all her most important choices. Sirs, I understand the complications my status has created, but I won't accept a role that removes me from supporting the troops who need help. If that means facing legal consequences, then that's a risk I'm willing to accept. The determination in her voice seemed to surprise both intelligence agents, as if they had expected practical considerations to override personal principles. Morrison nodded approvingly, recognizing the courage required to reject an offer that represented both opportunity and protection. Carter closed his briefcase with movements that suggested the meeting was concluding unsuccessfully from his perspective. Specialist Martinez, you should take time to consider our offer carefully. The situation on the ground is changing, and opportunities like this one may not remain available indefinitely. After the intelligence agents departed, Sarah found herself alone with Williams and Morrison. The weight of what had just transpired settled over all three of them as they contemplated the implications for the future. Morrison was the first to speak, his tone reflecting both admiration and concern. That took guts, Martinez, but you should understand what you just turned down. Official backing would have given you resources and protection that you can't get any other way. Sarah nodded, understanding Morrison's point while remaining confident in her decision. Commander, I've seen what happens when good people make compromises for the sake of convenience. The work we've been doing here matters because it's focused on saving lives, not advancing political agendas. Williams had remained silent during the exchange, but now he stepped forward with an expression that mixed pride and worry. Sarah, you know I support your decision, but we need to be realistic about what comes next. The attention from Defense Intelligence means our informal arrangements are probably coming to an end. The truth of Williams' statement hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, carrying with it the scent of changes that none of them could control. Sarah's rejection of the intelligence offer had preserved her integrity, but it had also eliminated the possibility of continuing her current operations indefinitely. Morrison studied both Williams and Sarah with the analytical mind that had made him an effective SEAL commander. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. What if we made this situation official through proper channels instead of waiting for someone else to force the issue? The suggestion intrigued Sarah, but she also recognized the enormous bureaucratic obstacles that would need to be overcome. The military establishment in 2005 was not prepared to officially recognize women in direct combat roles, regardless of their demonstrated abilities. Williams considered Morrison's proposal with the strategic thinking that had guided him throughout his career. The challenge would be documenting Sarah's achievements in a way that demonstrates her value without revealing the irregular nature of her previous operations. Over the following hour, the three of them developed the framework for a proposal that would request official recognition of Sarah's capabilities and authorization for her to continue operations under proper military auspices. The plan was ambitious and faced significant obstacles, but it represented their best chance of preserving the mission while protecting everyone involved. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing at attention in a briefing room filled with senior officers from multiple branches of the military. The formal review of her case had attracted attention from the highest levels of the command structure, including generals who rarely involved themselves in individual personnel matters. Commander Morrison had spent those 2 weeks building support for Sarah's case among special operations personnel who had benefited from her assistance. His efforts had resulted in testimony from over 30 officers who could attest to her effectiveness and professionalism under combat conditions. Colonel Williams had prepared a comprehensive presentation documenting Sarah's achievements, while carefully avoiding details that might compromise ongoing operations or reveal the irregular nature of her previous assignments. The challenge had been demonstrating her value without admitting to violations of military regulations. General Patricia Hayes, the senior officer conducting the review, was one of the few women to reach flag rank in the military and understood better than most the challenges Sarah faced. Her opening statement set a tone that gave Sarah hope for a favorable outcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to evaluate a situation that highlights both the evolving nature of modern warfare and the adaptability required from our personnel. The record before us demonstrates exceptional performance under extraordinary circumstances. The presentation that followed documented Sarah's achievements with clinical precision. 47 confirmed enemy eliminations, 0 civilian casualties, successful support for over 60 missions, and the preservation of American lives in situations where conventional tactics had failed. When Morrison testified about the Mosul incident, his description of Sarah's performance created a silence in the room that spoke volumes about the impact of what he was describing. The precision and tactical judgment he detailed exceeded anything the assembled officers had previously encountered. In my 15 years of special operations experience, I have never witnessed marksmanship or tactical decision-making that approached what this specialist demonstrated. She saved 6 American lives while operating alone in enemy territory with no backup support and no margin for error. General Hayes asked the question that everyone in the room was thinking. Commander Morrison, in your professional opinion, would Specialist Martinez be effective if assigned to special operations units with proper training and equipment? Morrison's response was immediate and unequivocal. Ma'am, with proper training and equipment, this specialist will be the most effective sniper in the United States military. Her natural abilities, combined with her combat experience, represent a resource that we cannot afford to waste. The formal review concluded with General Hayes announcing that a decision would be rendered within 72 hours. Sarah left the briefing room knowing that she had presented her case as effectively as possible, but uncertain whether the military establishment was ready to embrace the changes her situation represented. 3 days later, Sarah received orders to report to General Hayes' office for notification of the review board's decision. She arrived to find not only the general, but also Colonel Williams and Commander Morrison, whose presence suggested that the decision would affect all of them. General Hayes began with an acknowledgement that seemed to frame everything that would follow. Specialist Martinez, your case has forced us to confront realities about modern warfare that many of us would prefer to avoid. The effectiveness you've demonstrated challenges assumptions about roles, capabilities, and the nature of combat itself. Sarah braced herself for what sounded like the prelude to a rejection, but General Hayes continued in a direction she hadn't expected. The review board has concluded that your abilities represent a military asset that must be properly utilized and developed. Effective immediately, you are reassigned to Special Operations Command for advanced training and integration with elite units. The relief Sarah felt was tempered by the realization that her new assignment would fundamentally change the nature of her service. She would gain official recognition and support, but she would also become part of a larger system with its own constraints and expectations. General Hayes wasn't finished with her announcements. Additionally, you were promoted to the rank of Staff Sergeant, with all the privileges and responsibilities that rank entails. Your previous actions are officially recognized as having been conducted in support of authorized military operations. The promotion was both vindication and validation, confirming that her contributions had been valued despite the irregular circumstances of their performance. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and humility as she realized that her war in the shadows was ending, but her service to her country was entering a new phase. Commander Morrison stepped forward with a smile that reflected his satisfaction with the outcome. Sergeant Martinez, I have the honor of informing you that you've been selected for assignment to SEAL Team 6 for advanced training in special operations. It's an opportunity that very few personnel ever receive. The assignment represented recognition at the highest levels of special operations, but it also meant leaving behind the informal networks and relationships that had sustained her throughout her unauthorized operations. Sarah understood that she was being offered everything she had worked toward, but acceptance would require abandoning much of what had made her effective. General Hayes seemed to understand Sarah's internal conflict as she processed the magnitude of what was being offered. Sergeant, You should know that this decision was not made lightly. You've proven yourself under conditions that would challenge our most experienced operators, and you deserve the opportunity to develop your abilities to their full potential. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who had supported her through the most challenging period of her life. Williams had protected her when she had no official status. Morrison had validated her abilities when they were questioned, and now General Hayes was offering her a future that acknowledged her contributions. Ma'am, I'm honored by the confidence you're placing in me, and I accept the assignment with the understanding that my primary responsibility remains supporting the mission and protecting American lives. General Hayes nodded with satisfaction, recognizing that Sarah's response demonstrated the character and priorities that had made her effective in her unauthorized role. Sergeant Martinez, I believe you'll find that those priorities are exactly what makes Special Operations personnel successful. As the meeting concluded and Sarah prepared to leave for her new assignment, Commander Morrison approached her with an expression that mixed respect and anticipation. Sergeant Martinez, I know this transition won't be easy, but I want you to know that the community you're joining values the same things you've been fighting for: excellence, integrity, and dedication to protecting those who can't protect themselves. Sarah recognized the truth in Morrison's words, while also understanding that the challenges ahead would test her in ways that her previous operations had not. Official status brought opportunities and responsibilities that would require different skills and different sacrifices. That evening, as Sarah packed her limited possessions for the journey to her new assignment, she reflected on the path that had brought her from an anonymous communications specialist to a recognized special operations soldier. The ghost shooter who had operated in the shadows would cease to exist, replaced by an official member of America's elite military forces. Colonel Williams appeared in her doorway as she finished packing, carrying himself with a mixture of pride and sadness that marked the end of an important chapter for both of them. Sarah, I want you to know that working with you has been the highlight of my military career. You've shown me that sometimes the most important missions are the ones that never appear in the official records. Sarah understood that Williams was saying goodbye not just to her, but to a period of their service that had tested both of them in ways that formal military structure couldn't capture. Their partnership had been built on trust and shared commitment to values that transcended regulations and procedures. Colonel, everything I accomplished was possible because you were willing to take risks for something you believed in. That's a lesson I'll carry with me wherever this new assignment takes me. As Sarah departed for her new life as an official Special Operations soldier, she carried with her the knowledge that her year in the shadows had changed not just her own understanding of service and sacrifice, but also the military's recognition of what was possible when talent and opportunity converged under extraordinary circumstances. The ghost shooter was gone, but Sergeant Sarah Martinez had found her place in the official ranks of America's warriors. Her salute to Commander Morrison as she boarded the transport plane was returned with the respect due to a soldier who had proven herself under fire and earned her place among the elite. The legend of the unnamed female sniper would continue to circulate among military personnel for years to come, inspiring others to push beyond the limitations of conventional thinking and demonstrating that heroism often emerges from the most unexpected sources. But the woman behind a legend had moved forward into a future where her talents could be developed and deployed with the full support of the nation she had sworn to serve.